Nice. Dig the tropical background.
I'm dreaming.
Well, this definitely feels like a tropical place here today, doesn't it?
Mm.
Awesome. So I see we have a couple people who've joined already, so we'll give them a few more minutes to get online. It's good to see you, Peter. Hello, hello. Hope you're staying cool over at the shop today. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen too. Yeah, I'm definitely glad we got the AC or the HVAC fixed in the office here from last year. Otherwise, today would I don't think we would have had a webinar today, or would have
No,
been work from home and
certainly
everybody
not.
attempt to survive. See if the dog was still outside my door or not, or if she's migrated.
I don't see her.
She's causing havoc somewhere. Awesome. We'll go ahead and get started here now that
Okay.
we're coming up on 1:35. So, hello everybody. I'm Will MacFee from Systems Support, and today I want to talk a little bit about the invisible threat to business, which is easily summed up as compliance. Now, compliance a lot of times is usually, especially in our world for IT, you think of some law comes out, you have to meet it, has to do with meeting, in order to process credit cards, or there's some type of cybersecurity requirement. But today I wanted to talk a little bit more about compliance in the realm of where it is in your everyday life without really thinking about it, and then how that kind of maps cleanly to the IT world. And we're going to do that through automotive. But as I get started here, especially of the importance of compliance and why, when you say, and effectively, the way you could really sum it down is that you're going to do what you say you're going to do. But sometimes you don't really know what you're supposed to do. So for the invisible threat that will completely destroy your business is definitely around, in the IT world, which is a unregulated currently technology. There's a lot of, trying to guide it, a lot of things you can crash into. You need somebody to kind of help you navigate the kind of ups and downs of the IT world. And here's a example using a totally fictitious example. In fact, I used a farm equipment company just to make sure that none of my clients sat there and went, "Huh, is this me?" So let's say there's a farm equipment company out in the Midwest, has 100 employees, and his IT provider, his MSP, is getting alerts that someone inside the company is trying to download a dangerous file by clicking on a link over and over again. So the firewall prevents that one employee's computer from going to the website. The alert comes in. The MSP sees just one and is like, okay, somebody realized it was bad, no problem. But then sees 5, 7, 8, 9, 10 alerts. Then all of a sudden they go to another computer. It keeps going. So the MSP picks up the phone now that it sees multiple requests and then moving across machines, and picks up the phone and say, hey, somebody's trying to get around the firewall. They keep trying to click this link to a bad website. And this is when Bob, the owner of the farm equipment, sheepishly admits that he was the one trying to click the link. He needed a special part for one of his John Deere tractors that every other manufacturer had out, and he was trying to get the link to go get this special part. And when it didn't work on the first one, he tried it on another computer, and if the firewall wasn't in place, just from how he was naturally going about his business, something bad would have happened. And if If it wasn't for the firewall, the attackers would have let him right into his business. And this kind of illustrates the point of having the right tools on the system and having the education. So, you can't just kind of go, hey, don't click on bad links. You need to expand that to saying, hey, don't click on bad links. And you need to have some of the automated pieces in place. So exceptional business leaders in today's world really know that compliance isn't optional anymore with how you're supposed to operate and run your business. It's essential to have the necessary tools and to act in the appropriate procedures for making sure that when you're working with the internet and computers, that you're not going to introduce something that's going to take your day from bad to worse. I mean, he had everything in place. He had had the firewall, he had the antivirus, he had the MSP, but the only thing that wasn't really in place for him was the compliance. He wasn't doing what he was supposed to do. He wasn't checking a link to make sure that, hey, um, you know, if the website ends in a .ru, or suddenly the website takes you someplace you're not supposed to be, hover over the link. Since he wasn't doing those, that was where the kind of compliance breaks down. But oh Jesus, sorry. um, I'm way ahead of my slides. My apologies, everybody. So an example too for compliance is, let's say, a lot of people do as I say, but not as I do. So in a quick poll and from one of my providers, they found that 75% of CEOs use unapproved applications. So as far as the behavior for good cybersecurity hygiene, the CEOs aren't modeling the same behavior that they need their staff to model as well. So again, if you're in the average, you're probably finding some place to, like, hey, I'm not going to do it the right way, or shave some type of corner. And in that breakdown of compliance is where it just takes one event to take something going from bad to worse. In a compliance failure, I mean, all it takes is just one bad click, and your business, your dream, the thing you've been working and building can be destroyed in an instant. So you definitely need somebody too, in a pretty crazy world, to be able to detect those dangers and help train and coach for, like, hey, this is how you're supposed to be doing. This is how you're supposed to be interacting with the computers to make sure things are doing what they're supposed to. So I'll be perfectly honest, most of that stuff is pretty typical for the IT conversation. So now I want to take, after we've talked about IT compliance a little bit, take it to something that's a little more easily understandable by any God fearing American. Um, you know, Everybody has a dream car. I mean, even I can't imagine anybody who walks by some type of Ferrari, a Lamborghini, or something doesn't go, it'd be pretty nice to own one of those and, have that dream car and, be able to go super fast down the highway. So if we think about dream cars, you've got some that are powerful and fast, like the Hellcat. Maybe you've got something rugged and fast, like a Raptor. Or maybe luxury's more your speed with the, Rolls Royce. You want to be rolling in style like a Robert Barron from, back in the day. Or maybe you want the mix of luxury and off road in a Land Rover or something. And most people never get their dream car. I know my father-in-law is lucky enough to get his. He got a Ferrari, but he worked really hard. He was exceptional at his craft, and he made it happen. But what's interesting too is you think about humanity through the years and the different span of their dreams. Having a dream car is relatively, very new. I mean, it's only been 130 years since the car was first invented. Carl Benz from Mercedes-Benz patents the first car in 1886, and then it makes its way to America about 100 years later. So, cars are, all things considered, relatively new, when you think about the total human experience, or even just business experience from, trying to ship your goods across borders. So, what if I could say that I could give you the car of your dreams, but with one string attached? You had to drive it back in 1886. So you could get your Ferrari, you could get your Lamborghini, you could get your uh, Riviera there, but you have to drive it back in the day where there's no paved highways. There's no gas stations. There's no mechanics. There's no road signs. There's no stop signs. There's no Tiny and Sons. There's no lane markings. There's no auto parts store. So now you're at a point of trying to run your dream business or dream car in an era where there's none of the things to take care of it. So, just as an example of how difficult that could be, let's look at an experiment that the United States did right after World War One. So they thought, after this whole World War One thing, we should see that if God forbid something happens on the West Coast, how are we going to take all of our supplies from the East Coast and get it over to the West Coast? So the U.S. military had the Transcontinental Convoy in 1919, a mere 30 years after the car was first invented. And let's take a quick look at how poorly it went. Yeah, spoilers, right? It was 81 Army vehicles. They were going from D.C. to San Francisco, so from one base to another, about 3,200 miles. They had 230 road incidents. They had 21 people get hurt. 88 wooden bridges on their drive over were broken. They were an average of 5 miles per hour the whole time. And it took 2 months of travel. It took them 2 months to go from DC to San Francisco in 1919. That's 30 years after the car is invented. So as technology comes out, starts appearing everywhere, they invent trucks, but there's no infrastructure. There's nothing bringing it together to really get you from point A to point B. But let's show an example of how far we've come in a couple hundred years and how things have started to change. I'm sure a couple people have heard of the Cannonball Run, infamously from New York to LA. I believe it's a particular parking garage. And records were set in 2020 when miraculously no one's on the road. So one of the most recent record holders was an Audi S6, going from New York to LA. 2,900 miles, so about 300 miles shorter than that transcontinental convoy. Had no road incidents, didn't hurt anybody, didn't break any wooden bridges, had an average of 110 miles per hour, and did it in 25 and a half hours. Now, granted, COVID kind of helped with that in 2020, but I mean, look how far it had come in about 100 years from 2019 to 2020, 1919 to 2020. That the infrastructure is really there to be able to make it so that you're going from, we're trying to take this convoy of 88 vehicles and 22 people get hurt and we broke 80 bridges. As we look at this history of safety, insurance, and compliance in the auto industry, it helps to see the future of safety, insurance, and compliance in the digital world. Because again, the digital world is really only 30 years old. And while we think it's changing pretty rapidly, and it is, I mean, you saw that Carl Benz first car in 1886 versus the trucks that were already in place in 1919. We can safely say those are two wildly different technologies and do two very different things. But again, it was quite a haul to try and get from DC to San Francisco there. So in 1909, a mere 20 years there after the car is invented, there's 200,000 cars in the United States. And a mere 7 years later, that's up to 2.25. Rapidly expanding technology. Does that sound familiar to any IT worlds? Absolutely. And then a quote from back in the day was, the rapid change outpaced the creation of safety measures for cars and the laws to regulate all these new traffic. So they had 1916, 2.2 million cars are out on the road, and nobody had really caught up with making sure that things should be safe to operate or there should be any type of competence for it. So, first speed limit comes out in 1901. Whopping 15 years after the car is invented. Like, hey, maybe we should say how fast you should go in certain places. And then, they also thought that maybe we should issue driver's license in 1903, a couple of years after that speed limit. Hey, maybe around the same time, the state figured out that, we should license this and, have state issued plates. But for that driver's license, it took them 5 years to figure out that maybe you should take an exam before you get one. And then, hey, let's have a traffic light. Maybe we should kind of control the flow because there's so many of us. The first stop sign comes up in 1915. And again, remember, we're starting to approach 2 million cars in the United States. Road stripes, if you stay on your side, I stay on mine, show up in 1924. And the first paved interstate is in the middle of World War II. Again, this is 60, almost 50 years the first paved interstate shows up after the invention of the car. So Missouri was the state to first issue driver's license, but watch this. It took them 49 years to figure out that maybe we should have an exam for it instead of just handing it out to people. Maybe we should have a little skill or knowledge in order to give somebody this death machine that goes 50 miles an hour down these unpaved roads. And thinking of safety, cars. I know there was a story of Roald Dahl in his biography of riding with his half sister in a car, and they get in a car accident at 40 miles an hour. And this car had dual windshields, and Roald Dahl was launched through the windshield, and he obviously didn't have a seatbelt because it was long ago, and his nose was almost cut clean off. It was dangling by a thread, and they had to sew it back on. And the crash only happened at 41 miles an hour. That's a crash that, thank God, today you and I would be able to walk away from without barely a scratch. We'd be very unhappy, and there'd be a lot of insurance stuff to fill out, but I'd much rather that than, hey, doc, can you sew my nose back on? So seatbelts don't show up until 1955, and then it took a whopping 29 years to require people to say, hey, you need to put it on. And I don't know about you, but when I get in the car, it is second nature that I go like that and I click it. Mostly because I don't want to wake up one day and then figure out that, today's not my day. And of course, New Hampshire takes live free or die way too seriously. Speaking of safety, okay, cool. We have these things called, seatbelts. Finally, we're not getting launched through windshields at 35 miles an hour. So, but what about this whiplash I'm getting? Airbags show up in the mid 70s. Airbags are then made standard in 88. And I'm sure, Peter, you could probably speak to this way more about the backlash of car makers in that time saying you're going to bankrupt us by forcing us to put this feature into the car and it's going to kill our business. And then took another 10 years, and by the time I was 7 years old, so within my lifetime, to say, hey, you have to have airbags, it's not an option anymore. So 25 years to require front airbags from the time they're invented. And again, even in the past 25 years after they've been, invented, it's like, okay, you're required to have one if you're getting a crash from the front. But as we all know, sometimes I get hit from the side. Sometimes other stuff happens. I don't always go like this when I get crashed. Sometimes I go like this. So now we've added additional safety features to make sure you walk away, such as rear airbags, side airbags, curtains, all to make sure that, people are able to walk away. And, these are all required by the regulator. And so we can see that here in the car industry, 100 years later, the safety and compliance requirements are accelerating for, for the auto industry from, first paved road in 1940. So let's also think about, this kind of goes into the compliance piece, because it's very easy for us to say, yeah, compliance, big bad company has to do it. It's Ford. They can afford to spend millions of dollars to fix stuff. But let's think a little bit more about in our day-to-day lives. Something that we absolutely have control over is drunk driving. And luckily, a state back in 1910 had enough of wherewithal to say, hey, maybe if you're hammered, you shouldn't drive. But then it took a whopping 78 years for the feds to say, hey, this is the case everywhere. Nobody should drive drunk when they were operating. And so it took a whopping 75 years to do that. But even in as recent 1985, it was legal to drink and drive if you followed a specific route from Florida to Idaho. So you could go from Florida to the Canadian border, crushing Bud Light the whole way, as long as you went on the right roads. And it was only until 3 years before I was born that they said, hey, maybe you shouldn't do that. Also, too, as we think about different creature comforts that we have, parking garages, the whole concept of parking lots, the first one shows up in 1918. The parking meter shows up in 1935 for being able to collect on it. And of course, parking restrictions are a normal everyday thing that we're like, okay, we know that. Actually, Gail and I, you were talking about this on our drive to lunch today about, is there a beach sticker sign? I was like, yep, it's a beach sticker. It's valid from this hour to this hour. And that's something that you and I can look at a sign and understand very easily. Although sometimes, the signs aren't really clear. And this one from Denver is always a good laugh, because if you can figure out whether or not you can park there in the 10 seconds of looking at this, God bless you. That'd be you are smarter than I am. And that confusion, actually, this is a good point. The confusion of these signs makes compliance difficult. So, especially making a quick IT parallel, if the terms and pieces are confusing, you kind of have to have it spelled out for you. Like, hey, like, this doesn't do anybody good. It might as well just say no parking anytime, right? Um, so compliance can be made further difficult by confusion. Let's think of another everyday compliance one that sometimes we choose to do and sometimes don't. 1973, new technology called the cell phone comes out, and the first cell phone call is made. First cell phone driving law takes quite a while to show up in 2001, about, hey, maybe get off your phone while you're driving, don't be distracted. 92, the first text message is sent. And 15 years later, the first texting and driving law comes out. And a little bit of trivia is the first text message is Neil Papworth, and it said Merry Christmas. So hopefully that helps at your next trivia night. So all of that quick driver's ed course is really just to hit home that compliance with car safety laws and government regulations is invisible to us after 125 years. I don't think about clicking my seatbelt. I know that I have to obey the speed limit. I know that drinking and driving is not okay, and that you need to put the phone down while you're driving and keep your eyes on the road. All of that is compliance, things that I need to be doing while I'm operating the car. In the same token, the car itself and the industry around it has been worked on and improved for numerous safety features to make sure that if God forbid the worst thing does happen, that it's not going to kill me. I mean, back in the day too, I guess steering columns going right through you as well. So keeping on with that, driving, what happens if you don't comply with those rules? Well, it could be lawsuits. You get in a car crash and you hurt somebody. Next thing you know, you're paying for their medical bills for the rest of their life. While you can walk away from a crash at 40 miles an hour, you're going to be filling out a bunch of paperwork of, hey, I was doing this. No, I wasn't texting. No, my license is in order. Okay, now it has to go to this body shop. It has to go to an adjuster. You're going to have to maybe notify somebody. If you get a DUI, you're going to have to tell your boss that, hey, I can't drive to work anymore and I have to take Ubers and I'm going to be late, or take public transportation because I did something stupid. You have fines, obviously. I'm sure speeding tickets definitely count. You could have an actual monetary harm for non-compliance. Loss of customers, that might be like, hey, if you're a solopreneur driving your car and you get a DUI and you can't get to the job site, you lose the customer. You have the reputational damage. Again, you get in a bad car accident, it's because you were doing something stupid, could harm your reputation. Reduced revenue kind of goes with loss to customers, and obviously increased costs. Now you're fixing the car, your premiums have gone up. Not complying with the rules is not something that helps you out. And of course, there's always the stress and exhaustion of it too, because now it's something additional that you have to deal with. And it's like, if only I was paying attention. Also, too, I'll pick on Georgia football. This is from my friend Brian Graham, to be a staunch Alabama fan. So I'll pick on Georgia. Georgia's players. So Georgia recently, based on when you're watching this, won the national championship for college football. And not soon after, the Georgia football team lost 4 starters due to a series of driving incidents, drag racing, driving while intoxicated. So now the Georgia football team has lost 4 starters and now is in a distant second to Nick Saban and the Alabama football team. So not only has Georgia, hurt itself and its ability to perform, it's now also made Alabama even better, which, for better or for worse, for however your allegiances go. So, as we think about these compliance things, I mean, let's be honest. Not anybody, everybody watching here has definitely texted and drove. It's just a reality. To pretend that we haven't and that we've all been saints is just kind of kind of silly. And we're like, all right, what's the risk here? What's the risk? Is it that you look down for a couple seconds, you look back up, car stops short, etc. It's like, okay, I don't mean for it to happen, but it might happen. So what are some things you can do? Well, I could straight up ignore that risk. That is dangerous and foolish. I mean, it would be stupid of me to sit there and be like, oh man, if I text and drove, like, that's not risky. That's just totally foolish. I could avoid it. I could say, like, I'm not having my cell phone anywhere in the car. My cell phone simply stays at home, and I have a different cell phone at work, and I lock it in a trunk every time I'm there. It's unproductive and unrealistic. I'm not really going to take my phone, put it in a lockbox in the trunk every time I get in and out of the car. That would be absolutely insane and unproductive, and I'd lose so much time during the day. I could accept it. I could say, hey, I'm accepting this risk, and this is kind of difficult. Like, I know that it could be bad, but I have to I have to check what my wife sent me for picking up milk or something. Or I could say, like, hey, I'm gonna, but maybe instead of just accepting it and checking that text message right away, I could reduce it. Hey, I could say, like, I'm gonna make sure that I um, kind of do something where, like, I wait until I'm in park before I take the phone out. And then you can also, the last piece with risk is, transfer. So that, like, hey, I'm going to transfer the risk of having to clean, the consequence of a crash. I'm going to transfer some of that risk to the insurance company so that they're going to pay monetary pieces to kind of help me get back on my feet there. And that's um, that's effectively what insurance does in any way, shape, or form. And then you can eliminate it, but in some cases, it's impossible and unreasonable. There's no way to completely remove the risk of driving. You'd effectively just have to not drive. And even if you tried to walk everywhere, you're still on roads, so there's still a risk because of cars to you. So, I mean, eliminating it is pretty much impossible. So that complying with the behavior, and especially behavior of what your insurance policy asks for, is really important. So for my auto insurance, if I don't wear my seatbelt, I drink and drive, and I am texting, and I crash into a cop car, and I get ejected from the vehicle, my insurance is not going to pay for a lick of it, because they're going to say, you're not doing it. You didn't do any of the reasonable things that you need to do in order for us. Like, you just put all of the risk onto us, and you're not doing this right, so we're not paying. So IT is no different. You can't just buy any form of insurance or transfer some type of risk and just accept, like, oh, I'll just figure it out if it happens. You have to have the appropriate pieces to um, you know model the appropriate behavior to get moved over. And those guidelines and regulations are feeling so voluntary and less essential just because it's new. So if you think of it more like cars in 1919 or 1920 rather than cars today, there's all those compliance things in cars today that are second nature. But in IT, it's more, we're still on that transcontinental convoy more than anything. So again, to try and beat the punch and be those front leaders, we really need to understand that compliance in the technology space is now essential. And in order to be exceptional, you have to understand that compliance is essential. So as we're thinking about continuing to draw these parallels, we have safety and reliability of our cars, right? And that's something that we don't, your day-to-day driver, especially me, I don't really know cars too well. But in the safety and reliability, I depend on my mechanics, and I depend on my, the manufacturers for being able to make the car, and making sure that they're actually delivering on what they're promising on. So, but still, even I don't completely offload all the safety portions to, the car maker. I don't get up in the morning thinking I'm going to be in a wreck, but I still click my seatbelt and I still pay attention to the road. Especially security of the car, right? Hey, the idea of, some of the risk of having a car is it gets stolen, right? So and as we all know, there's no one solution to keep a thief from stealing your car, right? I mean, if they want it, they will find a way to get it. But most of what you're trying to do for somebody stealing your car is just make it harder. Just you have the door locked. There's nothing obvious there. Just try and get the guy to go on to the next one, right? So that's where that concept of multiple layers comes in. Insurance, a quick rundown of that. It only took 12 years for insurance to show up. Of course, they wanted to make money. 20 couple years after it's invented, they require it. That some states start having the law. By the 70s, most states are requiring insurance, that you have some type of risk coverage. And again, between invention of it and requiring is 72 years. Now, I imagine, just because of how quickly the economic interest changes, I don't think IT is going to have 72 years before it's required for you, and for you, in order to do business, that you have to have some form of cyber insurance, just simply because, hey, you're dealing with people's information. You're going to take payment of some sort. You have to have some type level of protection to make sure that if, God forbid, the worst happens, there's something that can help out with it. And of course, New Hampshire, live free or die. So compliance, again, is that last piece. How are you enforcing that safety, reliability, and pieces that you're working with it? So some funny compliance rules, different driving laws that are there. Obviously, there are some, but let's pick on Alabama. You can't drive while blindfolded. That seems like a no-brainer to me, but unfortunately, stupid rules exist for a reason. So thank you, Alabama. And we'll pick on another state as well. We'll go pick on Alaska. It is illegal to tie a dog to the roof of your car. Poor dogs. I can't. I mean, we all would definitely say, well, that's reasonable. But again, a law exists because for a reason, right? So again, for a lot of these driving things, compliance isn't something that we don't think about. I mean, every day when we go to get in our cars, we are complying with something in some way, shape, or form. So, coming back to the safety and reliability and starting to draw these parallels to IT, safety and reliability is, making sure that you have backups. Is there something that, if this goes down, if this thing doesn't work for whatever reason, can I get it back up and running? That kind of mechanic portion. Or, if something that my data is damaged, do you have backups? So you need to make sure, for any IT partner that you have, that they have secure backups. It's not just copying files to a USB stick. And then the other big part too for safety is, double checking vendor and supplier access to the system. I know there are a lot of software vendors that are out there, and then double checking, hey, if they have remote access into our network, how is that secured? Because if they get breached, somebody starts deploying ransomware to them, how do I know that they're not going to remote onto my systems and then encrypt that as well? How do I know that? And that's why, for our remote access, we have the two-factor audited systems to try and prevent that downstream attack. So again, the compliance with making sure that you're reviewing vendor access and backups are, going through. You can't have any form of reliability in your life without compliance. And especially even going back to the car thing, I'm not going to have reliability in my car if I don't comply with, making sure I get it inspected, so that the guy tells me, like, hey, your headlights are way too dim and you're not going to be able to see at night. Or, hey, you really need to get your oil changed. Like, the check engine light is on. You need to go get that fixed so that you don't break down in the middle of the road and cause a giant traffic jam and cause issues. So as the drivers, when we share the road, we're also sharing responsibility for safety. That's why, giving people space for merging and everything like that. And all those parallels in the IT world of information superhighway, it's the same idea. We're sharing a global network of roads, and it's a social responsibility as well when you're going out into that internet portion. So even in going out that, granted, since it's not moving a lot, like, what do you do with your assets that are at rest? And this is where the security portion comes in. So one of my favorite things I love to hear is, most company owners think they're too small to be attacked, And hey, I don't have anything the bad guys want. But those who know understand that small and medium sized businesses are the most likely to experience cyber attacks, specifically because Fortune 500 can spend a lot on cybersecurity, and you got to do a lot of work to get into them. But I mean, it's much easier to be able to walk down the street, open a car door of somebody whose car is unlocked, and just grab the wallet out of the front seat. I mean, that's an easy payday right there. So it's not that you're too small, it's just that you're too small to be on the news. So the average cost of a data breach these days, all in, especially if any type of payment information gets compromised, is around $3.8 million. And that's for companies with about 100 employees and below. And that's between forensics cleanup, reputational damage, lost clients, lost productivity. The list goes on and on for when something bad happens. And honestly, if security was all that mattered, that somebody would never be able to touch something, like the concept of never having a car crash, you'd never turn your computer on. You just it would live in a Faraday cage, and you view it through a viewport and use robot hands to type or something like that. You know, but instead, we understand that we have to get out there, and there's a risk to it. So, unfortunately, we have to deal with the millions and millions of other people who are out there. So just two for thinking of the invariable, oh, it won't happen to me. A car is stolen every 41 seconds, according to the FBI. A business is breached every 39 seconds. So if you think about it, all the millions and millions of cars out there versus the millions and millions of cars out there versus the millions and millions of businesses, it happens more often than we think. And again, like I mentioned, for the guy walking by and popping the wallet out, it's locking your car. Security and IT's, it's not an end all be all that I can promise and never and deal in absolutes. You're just trying to make it a little frustrating, especially, and that's the goal in the small and medium sized business world, is that you're trying to make it just a little. You're making it as frustrating as possible for somebody to try and do something, so that they throw their hands in the air and move on to the next one. Because why would I bother dealing with an attorney that has, they've got threat lockers, so they're not able to launch a command prompt script. They have Huntress, so they saw that I was doing this. They have the firewall, so I'm not able to get onto the printer. The printer's default password has changed. I spent 15 minutes on this. Screw this. And they go to the next guy. The router password's never been changed on the Comcast network. It's easy to break in. Oh, sweet. They have all their clients' social security numbers are in their Outlook because they've done scanning documents. Payday. One took 15 minutes and was a pain. The other took 5 minutes and got everything that they needed. They just want to get paid at the end of the day. So your average ransomware attack, forget full breach, but just getting locked up, proof that nothing came off site, still about $133,000 all in for cleaning up, trying to restore from backup, lost productivity, the whole kit and caboodle. And again, I get a lot of questions about, is there one software I should use or something? And the unfortunate answer is that there's no silver bullet. You have to spread the risk appropriately, and that, really you have to have defense in depth and that layered defense. And that's the same thing too that I did in the nuclear industry. The control rods weren't the only thing we depended on to shut down the reactor. There's control rods, there's pumps, there's pumps on pumps. There's even more pumps. There's even more safety valves. There's additional safety valves. I mean, there's even boron to be able to, there's an acid that they can dump in. So you put layers and layers and layers to make sure that try and make sure that the worst doesn't happen. So again, you're just trying to frustrate the attacker so that they just move on to the next one. And unfortunately, the easiest one, and this is strictly in the compliance space, is 90% of cyber attacks start with a phishing email. Comes in via the email, and if the user isn't trained and clicks on the link, or even if they just have two-factor, I've done all my side to make sure that the two-factor is on, the spam filter is set up, but one of the clients gets breached because they don't use us, and then they send out this form, and then the form asks you to log in, and the person logs in, and then the two-factor code is stolen, the little token. um, Still to this day, phishing is the single largest one. And while spam filters can handle a good chunk of it, and multi-factor helps with the other chunk, user training is really the last frontier for it. And again, it's as simple as clicking a seatbelt. Just double check. So, for IT partners, are you doing that cybersecurity training? Are you doing phishing testing to make sure, hey, are people clicking on things they're not supposed to be doing? And then are people just made aware of, like, hey, Comcast, Amazon does not want to send you a gift card. They just don't. So don't click on that email. And of course, as things are getting more and more intense, as those costs breaches are rising, insurance is becoming more and more important. And again, hey, the risk is real for whether you're out there, and there's no such thing as completely eliminating it. And the only truly secure system is one that is turned off in a block of concrete in a lead-lined room with armed guards at the bottom of the ocean. I mean, that's really the only truly secure one. So because there's risk, we want to spread it out a little bit. So that's where insurance comes in. Let's think about how this actual damage to security starts to come in as well. 1988, we get the first internet virus, and 9 years later, we get the first cyber insurance policy is written. So the cybersecurity insurance isn't something that's necessarily new. It's just something a lot of insurance agents have been pushing lately. But it's something that is just starting to come up more and more, especially because how often these things are happening is becoming more and more. And that first virus in '88 was just trying to screw with people. It wasn't really something to make money with it. And so as you think about insurance and risk today, if you think of, especially, you've hiring, especially for a mature risk posture, right? You do all the things right. You have in the interview, you're asking the same questions when you're going to hire someone. You handle their, incoming information with white gloves. You're not asking somebody walking in and you're like, hi, so are you married? Do you have kids? How old are you? Asking all those interview questions in the first interview that gets you sued. Because then your insurance company would be very unhappy that why are you getting sued by somebody for discrimination and asking questions about things you're not supposed to ask questions about. So especially too for cyber insurance, a lot of people think, hey, it's not going to happen to me. Hey, the cyber insurance is expensive, or they don't put the controls in place. So only 32% of companies have some form of cyber liability insurance. And one thing to really double check too is that for having cyber liability insurance, is your IT partner recommending it? Are they reviewing it to be able to tell you, like, because I know a lot of insurance agents that are just pushing it, and I'll be perfectly frank, and I won't name names. They have no idea what they're talking about. They're pushing the policy simply as a sale, and they're selling it to people that are, I'll take one look at them, and it's like, if they have a claim, that will never pay out because there's no way, like, this person has an AOL email account. There's no way that they have an AOL email account and they're an attorney and they deal with people's sensitive information. There's no way that claim pays. And then even if the claim pays, is it going to be enough? Is there a way to say, like, yeah, based on your size, this coverage sounds okay, but, like, hey, you should go back to your agent and maybe ask for a little more. And the other piece that's a big part of it too is that it's not just external threats. It's not just the proverbial kitty in the basement. It could be an internal one. It could be an employee inside the office is not happy about something and wants to cause hell on their way out. So you have to think about the insider threat as much as you think about the external threat. So a cyber attack really comes from outside. So there's an enemy at the gate, but a compliance issue comes from inside, and sometimes the compliance issue on the inside lets in the attacker from the outside, like in that phishing email. And let's say too, especially for all of our businesses, I don't know if anybody is thinking about growing the business to be able to sell someday and really thinking about the value of their business. If you start talking to different private equity firms or other investors or some other company that wants to buy your business, if you have a data breach or you're not taking the appropriate protections, that has a legitimate material threat to the bottom line value. I know that Paul Sissel is a guy here in Boston that does a ton of business brokerings, and a big part that he talks about is just, you're going to buy an accounting firm and it turns out all of the client data is, stored on one USB drive. Like, you're not really going to, that's a risky business, because all the client data that you need to do the job is depends on making sure one Western Digital hard drive works. That's not a great business if you ask me. So again, being exceptional, the compliance helps with making sure that you're going to be there and your business is valued appropriately. And kind of back to that car insurance point, no insurance company is going to write you insurance without you meeting the rules that they set forth. So as we kind of talk about these rules that are being set forth, I mean, yeah, insurance is great that it'll give you a stack of cash, but the insurance company isn't going out and restoring your reputation that, hey, somebody's credit card may have gotten, that, you didn't protect their credit card information. The insurance company's not going out and getting a customer back. And, it's not replacing your revenue at all. Because, I mean, insurance is a business too. I mean, this is a great example. Love picking, well, don't love picking on Allstate, but um, Allstate's not selling insurance in California anymore because of the wildfires. So no more home insurance, and it's just because it got too expensive for them. And the same thing can happen there. Is, hey, if behaviors are still going on that cause the insurance companies to pay out, they just won't do it anymore. And then you'd be left being able to try and clean up that incident without any form of recourse. So, if you have some type of claim and you check the box and said, yep, users don't have admin credentials, and it turns out like everybody's a local admin on the machine, they're going to call you negligent and then say that, we're not going to pay the claim. It's, you weren't meeting the conditions of the policy that we gave you. And small businesses are less prepared, and I get it. We've got a lot going on. There's less money to invest in getting it right. There's no giant in-house team to do compliance. But again, we still deal with clients. We still deal with personal data, and that liability risks are still very, very real. And again, the most common compliance ones, especially for this, would be compliance with some form of law, of saying like, hey, I'm following the letter of the law. Big ones are definitely the employee information, customer data. So if, for your employees, if you do background checks and you have social security numbers or banking information, take the appropriate steps to protect that. Maybe you have something where you are working with the Federal Trade Commission. So maybe some of the FTC guidelines come in, and then something a lot of people do, credit cards. I mean, those PCI agreements are a lot thicker than you think they are. And it's not as simple as, hey, take this box. If they find out that a breach happens through you, oh boy. And then, of course, there's a ton of other compliance requirements. There can be local, state, federal, credit card, something that's in a vendor contract. Maybe a vendor you work with says, hey, you need to be able to perform the following reliability. Maybe your customer is requiring it, an insurance or investor, or maybe even your own internal ones, just to say, like, hey, I'm following what I'm saying I'm doing. It gets warm in here with the door on. Wow. And of course, there's some of the fun acronyms. I know HIPAA is a big one. CMMC is for military, and PCI is definitely credit card processing. So that's one a lot of people will see. And for some of that, making sure you're saying what you're doing, what you say you're doing. Multi-factor is a big part. Just making sure that's on everything. Putting controls to force strong passwords in different places. Dark web monitoring, like, hey, is something coming up that, a couple of our names are popping up on the dark web? And then, hey, is there any type of configuration on email to say, maybe we don't email out stuff that looks like credit cards, social security numbers, or maybe if we do, an alert is generated so that we can talk to people about it. Some other day-to-day ones, patching, and how often do they review the patching? I know we do it weekly. And that's, mostly so that you're not always sitting there watching updates go through. But I think definitely in the near and immediate future, cybersecurity exercises are going to be absolutely expected of all companies. Especially, I have a sneaking suspicion the banks will be one of the first ones to push it down that, hey, if you're going to do ACH or any type of payment automation, you got to have some form of compliance to make sure that information's not stolen, because that's just really where the money is at the end of the day. And even Robert Herjavec from Shark Tank, who I had the pleasure of meeting, said on Shark Tank, "Hey, America, get ready! Cybersecurity regulations are coming, and it's a good thing because, I mean, just like as we were seeing with cars, it's a good thing that airbags are standard. That there are stoplights that you have to take a test to do, to be able to drive a car. You know, those regulations are coming, and like even more things to check on. I know for the partner checklist, is there some type of web filtering just to be able to catch if there is a bad website? um, have you moved away from a basic antivirus like just using Kaspersky or something and gone to something a little more advanced that allows for reporting back and tracking what's going on? Our risk assessments are performed. Just being able to say, hey, you got this, you got that, or any type of vulnerability scan of just saying, hey, we know about these issues that are here, and we're waiting for a vendor patch. I know that's something we're starting to work on a little bit more here, as some of our tools are getting better at catching vulnerabilities. And then especially too, having that in case of fire, what do you do? Has your IT partner explained and documented what you should do if a system's compromised? Do you have the steps to take of like, hey, something's happened, and okay, you've called us, but sometimes if it is a ransomware event, sometimes you don't want to have the IT company jump in and clean up, because it could hurt what the insurance company needs for um, forensics. So I love this quote. There are two different types of companies in the world: those who have been breached and know it, and those who have been breached and don't know it, because it is definitely a concept of it's not if, it's when. And typically, for most attackers, it takes an average of 197 days to detect a breach. So that if something has happened, going, whoa, this has been in here and has been in here for a long time. And then once discovered, it takes an average of 68 days to then contain it afterwards to make sure that everything has been moved over and improved upon. So prevention isn't, you don't just want the software that bumps back against something. You need something that detects that something has gone wrong, because that if something has been breached, you want to be able to have the appropriate people responding to it right away. It's not enough just that the antivirus blocks the file, but how did the file get there in the first place? So if you can catch a breach within 30 days, the statistics say that you can save over $1 million. So again, that's kind of again goes to the point of being able to be quick on it, to catch it and get through it. So this is something I'm very proud about, of meeting with our clients on a pretty regular basis. I love our technology business reviews, and especially too being able to hand over all the documentation of, hey, here's how we're keeping you safe and what we're doing for you. And one of these last kind of points, for being exceptional these days, you have to know compliance is essential, because whether we like it or not, every company's now a technology company. And if you don't comply and do what you're supposed to do day in and day out, not complying could destroy your business the same way that looking down at your cell phone at the wrong time could destroy your life by crashing into the back of a car. And you need an experienced partner who can at least detect the danger, protect your reputation, and protect your revenue. And the last slide is the full partner checklist of questions to ask, which I'd be more than happy to give out to anybody. But that's everything that I've got here today. I know that was a lot of slides, 101 by what PowerPoint's telling me, but I appreciate everybody hanging on with me here today. Are there any questions from the audience?
Will, I don't see any attendee chat requests.
Awesome. Well, not awesome, but hey, it works. I know that I'm going to be using these metaphors a lot more, because a lot of us drive cars, so it makes total sense. But I think it's a very useful mental model to use for thinking about, compliance and how using a car, which to me is black magic. I mean, a lot of the engine stuff, and I know a lot of people for IT think computers are black magic. Um, kind of thinking about all that compliance and security and safety stuff that goes into it that is just normal day to day for me. Awesome. Well, with that, everyone have a wonderful day. I know my car said it was 91 degrees here on July 27th. So for those who are out there, try and stay cool. And thanks so much for joining us today. Have a wonderful day.
Bye bye.